the struggle for citizenship rights is not a futile one, and those who are already becoming dejected should really realize that it is not futile, it is necessary, it is fundamental, and therefore all efforts need to be joined together in order to defend and protect the interests of Nigerian citizens. So the struggle for citizenship rights is not futile, is not a futile one, and it should not be seen to be so. It is necessary and it should be embraced by all if Nigeria is to become a truly democratic, stable, developed nation with the requisite sense of belonging by all its citizens. But I've been talking about citizenship and social justice. It's important to really understand each of these concepts as we join them together. And I've taken the next two sections of the lecture to discuss what is the concept of citizenship. What does it mean to be a citizen? What are the duties and responsibilities of a citizen? And what is the obligation of the state with regards to protecting and defending the rights and the interests of a citizen? And then I also discussed the notion of citizenship, which is an elaboration of the relationship between citizens and the state in the context of a modern nation state. The concept of a citizen and citizenship have historically changed in meaning and significance as societies have evolved. For example, what these concepts mean in the Greek city-states and during the Roman Empire is different from their ordinary meaning now in the context of modern nation-states. In the city-states of ancient Greece, when people lived in small-scale organic communities called the polis, citizens were freeborn male members of society, and of course in this definition, slaves and women were excluded, so they are not considered as citizens in the Greek polis. But these male freeborn males that were defined as citizens had equal rights, and they actively participate in the political life of their communities. They have entitlements, they have rights, as well as obligations as citizens. Citizenship in this context was a much simpler relationship between an individual and his community. But we are talking of almost thousands of years ago. Under the Roman Empire, citizenship was defined expansively to cover the entirety of the empire, which served essentially to legitimize Roman rule over its conquered territories. In this context, the notion of citizenship goes beyond the political agency to mean and to represent a judicial safeguard and the expression of the rule of law by the Roman Empire over its conquered territories. So people in conquered territories with certain qualifications were also recognized as citizens of the Roman Empire. So the concept of social justice is a 20th century formulation which has been embedded into international law and international institutions, and which to a large extent has become binding to most modern nation states who have signed international conventions and treaties and other international obligations. Thus, in the modern nation state, especially under the liberal democratic dispensation which Nigeria is trying to practice, the state is expected to, in discharging its obligations and responsibilities to citizens, is expected to operate within the context and the framework of social justice, which can be defined as, I quote, fair and just relations between the individual and society, and measured in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and social privileges, end of quote, within a modern nation state. In other words, social justice requires that the state treats all citizens fairly and justly with regards to breaking of barriers for social mobility within the state, within the nation state, with regards to the creation of social safety nets, and with regards to economic justice, or more specifically, reduction of economic inequalities and addressing poverty among the majority of the citizens. According to the United Nations, again, I quote, social justice may be broadly understood as the fair and compassionate distribution of the fruits of economic growth, end of quote. Indeed, it is a fundamental requirement for the state in, I quote, assigning rights and duties in the interests of society, end of quote, and in meeting the collective developmental aspirations of all citizens. The wealth of society should ideally be fairly distributed, and in this distribution, with equity, with equality of opportunity also guaranteed. So, when you now look at the concept of what a citizen is, and what citizenship means, and what social justice also represents, what is the situation with regards to Nigeria as a modern nation state? And that is what I try to look at in the section that now comes. The ruling class and the governing classes either do not understand or deliberately undermine the essence of citizenship, ignore it, decide who to confer privileges and rights to, and deny rights to the majority of Nigerians. And in addition, they fail to factor the notion of social justice in what the state does through its own institutions. Of course, they are more interested in controlling public resources, in accessing these public resources, and in privatizing these public resources, rather than deploying them appropriately in order to satisfy the fundamental needs and aspirations of citizens, which they are obligated to do even under the Constitution, which is the governance framework in our country. Citizenship rights are fundamental, are important, and they must be protected. That can be an issue for a minimum agenda for struggles. And how can we do this? Of course, there is a number of ways we can do this, but we can begin by developing a framework for a constitutional amendment that will make citizenship rights justiciable. I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about making, for example, the directive principles of state policy justiciable. But I'm talking about citizenship rights being justiciable. If you are a Nigerian citizen, whether born or naturalized, wherever you live in this country, you have the same rights as every other citizen. And that right must be defended, and not only defended, the courts must also enforce it. And it is possible to do this. We can develop movements on the basis of that minimum agenda. And of course, there will be related other areas of struggle, even in that context. And it can be pursued simultaneously as a struggle to defend and protect the interests of citizens of Nigeria, to protect citizenship rights, but also to defend and protect other fundamental rights. So it's very, very important that we pay our attention to this. So what is to be done? To actualize the goal of a united, stable, social, democratic Nigeria, based on the principles articulated in the preceding paragraphs of this lecture, I believe that even within the context of the liberal democratic system which we currently operate, which we are striving to nurture and develop, significant recommendations concerning what is to be done could be made. And I therefore wish to make at least 2 recommendations in this regard. First, we must work towards a constitutional amendment which borrows a leaf from the 14th Amendment of the United States of America's Constitution, and we should really do this in order to address the question of citizenship and social justice in Nigeria. In spite of the formidable challenges which we live in, which we see day by day in this country, and which currently attend to the issue of citizenship rights and social justice in our country, we have to devote energy and attention to the struggle to more appropriately actualize citizenship rights and social justice in Nigeria. And we should not consider the struggle for this as futile. It should rather be recognized that there is scope for considerable improvement of this context, and we should create what I call broad alliances, maybe even an improvement over the broad alliances which we have had in this country in the 70s and in the 80s, to engage and pursue these limited objectives. If we do not engage because we are hesitant to get in the mud and we don't want to dirty our hands, then the swines, what I call the swines of our political terrain, who flourish in the dirty mud, would continue to muddle through and trample upon our citizenship rights and our aspirations for democratic development and governance predicated on social justice would be negated. We must not allow this to happen, and we must continue to fight. It is the nature and the character of this country, which is disappointing to all of us, that has probably infuriated you to the extent of beginning to question whether there is indeed a country called Nigeria. So please let us not deny what exists, but let us focus and devote our attention to making what exists better or best in terms of protecting our interests, of advancing our interests, promoting our interests of all of us who are citizens of this country. And that is really the fundamental essence of our question. Many Nigerians, young Nigerians, as well as old Nigerians, are so disgusted and frustrated with what Nigeria has become and the failed promises of this country that they even think the struggle for citizenship rights and fundamental rights and social justice is futile. And that is why I began with that issue in my presentation. I'm saying it is not futile. I'm saying that we all have a responsibility to improve and defend and protect our citizenship rights and to make sure our country becomes better, becomes a country that we can respect, that we can be proud of, and that we can actually sacrifice our lives to protect and defend. Because that's what citizenship is all about, the kinds of obligations it expects from its citizens, you know. So I understand the frustration, but I think that we should have some deep thinking, not in the direction of where your question was going.
In our country today, the greatest worry, apart from pervasive misery, poverty, unprecedented poverty, apart from those, the greatest worry is increasing state terrorism and criminalization of enjoyment of democratic rights. That is the greatest worry. What is the role of education in all of this? Chief Gani Fawehinmi lived as a completely detribalized Nigerian. He did not see people in terms of ethnic or religious identities. He fought for the rights of human beings, regardless of primordial differences. For those who were old enough to know him, or to even work with him. He was constantly on the streets, expecting that the masses would join him, protesting against injustice, protesting against deprivation of rights. And that is to say that citizenship rights, democratic rights would never be given by any government unless the masses fight for those rights. And he designed the scholarship scheme as an opportunity to enable youths have access to education. We cannot overthrow government by peaceful protest. And if a government is overawed and intimidated by peaceful protest, that is a manner provided for in the Constitution. Section 40 is the revolt section of the Constitution. It permits people to revolt against policies that are, that deprive them of their rights. Then we also talk about the commodification of education. Today, education has been commodified in Nigeria. It has become a product like Gari, which you buy and sell. Education has been, the price of education, the school fees continue to rise, and so many people have been deprived the right to education. And we quoted these policies, principles of Chief Ganiyu Oyesola Fawehinmi, who insisted, and we repeat after him, we insist that education is a right, a right that must be defended, and we should not allow government to take away that right, because we must be very clear in our minds. Deprivation and denial of the right to education is nothing but a policy to produce future bandits that will deprive us the right to life under Section 33 of the Constitution. We must go through the traverse of popular struggles to bring about fundamental changes to the system of governance in Nigeria, so that the welfare of ordinary people governs the philosophy of governance. Let us patiently work and organize with iron determination, with a rat's fundamentalist commitment without compromising. Let us toil and sweat to bring about a revolutionary system change in Nigeria. A new world is possible. We should never despair. There is hope for a better tomorrow, but only if we organize and fight for it. Rights are never given. They have to be fought for and won.